tonight. Thank you so much for coming with a sold-out crowd. Barnstable Historical Society is thrilled to see everybody here, and wasn't it an incredible meal? We want to thank Lenny Clark. You might know him because he has a rather famous wife. Lenny Clark, thank you so much.
He did the chowder on behalf of bars.
Okay. And Lenny particularly should be appreciated for many reasons, many nuances. He made the chowder in honor of bars, and the bars table is sitting right here in front of you. And since you're all going to join bars this year so that you can make your own chowder, I'd like you to go and look at the exhibit that was put here by Lenny, right?
And others.
And others from bars, showing different clam rates and so on. So make sure you go over there. We also have Bill from the Old Fairground Restaurant in Marston's Mills. He's not looking at me now. Okay.
Tavern on the
Penny,
Green.
go and look. Oh. Now, Bill is the manager of, again, the Old Fairgrounds Restaurant, which is part of one of the town golf courses across from Marston's Mills Airfield on 149. His restaurant is a hidden gem. It is so wonderful to go to. You can sit there on a Sunday afternoon and watch the planes and the gliders come in. His food is wonderful, sincere. It's an incredible place to go to, so please go there. Now, he made the the chili and the cornbread, right? And now, Bill, you have to drag Dickie out. And Dickie has helped in the kitchen. I don't think anything would have been done without him, so get him out there.
And Peter also. Peter let the rockets make.
Yeah, made chowder.
Peter
Peter.
let the rockets.
Alessarasa. I know I always mess up your name.
Peter Eat.
Okay, Peter. Peter is wonderful. Peter's on the board of the Coast Guard Heritage Museum with me. He made the what?
He made some of the chowder.
Oh, he helped with the chowder. Again, Lenny's out here clapping, and I want to let you know that Lenny has been married for 37 years to this woman over here. Which one's the lucky one? So I want to introduce our speaker tonight. Betsy, did I leave anything out, by the way? I know you will. So this woman, I want you all to get another 1 or 2 drinks, because to describe what she's done is going to take a long time. She got her degree in environmental studies from Springfield College. She's currently the Beach Point Oysters Shellfish Farm assistant. She's probably going to tell me if I do anything wrong. Right before that, she was the shellfish manager for the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe. Also worked for the town of Barnstable for many, many years, shellfish propagation technician and deputy shellfish constable. So be careful what you do around her. Also, she is from West Barnstable, which I happen to like as a village. I like all the villages, and there's a few of us here. She was one of the West Barnstable Water Commissioners. She has been townwide on the Shellfish Committee, the Barnstable Land Trust, West Barnstable Historical Society, West Barnstable Civic Association, and she has run for 78 years the Village Festival, the third week of August, Saturday. She's also a member of Town Council. She's from Precinct 11. And I hope she's loving it, but I know she's working very, very hard, keeping up with everything. She has been the organist for Our Lady of Hope Church, West Barnstable Civic Association. I think I said that. River Day, Marston's Mills, helped to plan that for a long time and was the originator of that. She's won awards such as West Barnstable Citizen of the Year, 2004, Barnstable Land Trust Founders Award, APCC, Association to Preserve Cape Cod Environmental Champion of 2008, and Red Cross Hero as an adult mentor. And there's more, but we'll stop. I think we'll stop. Yeah, we'll stop. So here she is.
Thank you, Nancy.
And she's the best lady in the world.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, so I'll give you my take on shellfishing in Barnstable. So here we are. The town of Barnstable is in the county of Barnstable, and the county of Barnstable is one out of 14 counties in our state, in the Commonwealth. Barnstable Harbor. Barnstable Harbor is where I spend a lot of my time, and is beloved by so many of us here. So the shellfish in our area have had a long history. And from Pat Anderson's application for the Sandy Neck to be placed on the National Register of Historic Places, there was substantiation made about the shell heaps on Sandy Neck, and the majority of the recorded sites on Sandy Neck were described as shell middens. And the shell midden sites on Sandy Neck can be expected to yield archaeological data directly related to the problems of resource structure, availability, selection, and seasonality, thus allowing insight into local subsistence patterns during the last 3,000 years. So the evidence of shellfish contributing to the populations in this area is deep. Here is a remnant of a shell midden on Sandy Neck, and this photo is courtesy of Ken Morton. And from an article in the New York Times, it says, while many of New England's Native American artifacts have decomposed in acidic soils, those in middens are often well preserved, as the calcium carbonate in the shells creates more alkaline conditions. So I drew from a fair amount of history from this document published in 1986, The Historic and Archaeological Resources of Cape Cod and the Islands. I should say it's quite extensive, 432 pages. So it shows, it references on page 25 that over 13,000 years ago, the existing archaeological record suggests that hunter-gatherers entered New England, and that there's some evidence that they have traversed Cape Cod as well. So from 8,000 to 6,000 years before the present, there's a reference about sites flanking either side of Maraspin Creek near the mouth of Barnstable Harbor were habitated before Sandy Neck and Barnstable Harbor were developed. And it says there are unsubstantiated claims by collectors that some of their middle archaic material was retrieved from shell middens. So in a reference from 6,000 to 3,000 years before the present, it talks about exploiting abundant shellfish by the inhabitants back then. And from 3,000 to 450,000 years before the present, it says the identification of great auk, I'm not sure what that could have meant, maybe a gannet, I'm not sure. Sea mammals, shellfish, and terrestrial mammals from salvaged midden deposits, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, the significance of shell middens preserved a lot of artifacts from when the Cape was first habited. And here's a reference, finally, to the size and density of the shell middens, and the exploitation of shellfish shifted from summer until the winter. So at contact period, 1500 to 1620, when the Europeans came, here's another reference to shell middens, are numerous on Cape Cod. So although there's no written record of shellfish being attributed to the viability of the people who lived around here, the evidence is in the shell middens that were collected. Okay, that wakes you up. So here we are at the time of the Pilgrims. Pilgrims landed in Plymouth, 1620. Mass Bay Colony was established in 1630. And in that document on page 239, it says the first trading vessel of which there is record was that of Barnstable's Thomas Huckins, who established a tavern at the end of Scudder's Lane by 1652. He also maintained a landing place and ran a packet which transported liquor, powder, and shot and other commodities. So here's a topographic map surveyed in 1939, and it shows Huckins Island, after which it was named for Thomas Huckins. And on 6A, you can see evidence of where his homestead was, not far from Scudder's Lane. So moving on, along the permanent European settlements on the Cape, Barnstable was settled in 1638, and then both Barnstable and Yarmouth split into east and west parishes, Barnstable in 1717 and Yarmouth in 1721. And then the intensive linear development happened around Pond Village, right along here. All right, on the south side, as early as 1666, Nicholas Davis built an oyster warehouse on Lewis Bay at what is today Hyannis. In the 17th century, the ready availability of oysters, prevalent from Bass River to Pompanesett, was the magnet that attracted settlers to the South Sea area of the South Shore. Lacking ice, they were originally pickled in barrels of brine. And the Mashpee Indians were at one time referred to as the South Sea Indians. Also from that historical and archaeological record, references here from the 1600s, a part of the fisheries was the harvesting of various forms of shellfish, including oysters, clams, scallops, mussels, and lobsters. And although oysters were commercially harvested in Barnstable for much of the 19th century, the real prominence of the business in Cotuit dates to the late 19th and early 20th centuries, when several firms were organized to market the Cotuit oyster. In 1912, the Cotuit Oyster Company was formed by the merger of several individual oystermen, and by 1930, Cotuit was a name synonymous with oysters everywhere. And on page 277, in Barnstable, clamming reached its peak between 1910 and 1925, whereas steamer clams have periodic sets. So the late industrial period refers to farmers and fishermen. And here on page 230, there was so much farming that there's a reference that says the erosion may have in part been responsible for the silting in of numerous harbors and for the death of oyster beds. Here's a picture, thank you to Nancy Shoemaker, shorefront shacks in Hyannis Port that shows packets in the background. So I was a waitress in 1982 at the Piccadilly Deli in Barnstable Village. And one of my earliest customers was Wilton Presby Marshall. He died in 1995, but he was in his 90s when he passed away, but he was a lifelong shell fisherman. But I recall that he told me that during the Prohibition, he received good money from the rum runners because selling clams from Barnstable had to move fast due to their quick perishability. And during Prohibition, the shellfish harvesters got very good money for their harvest so that the bootleggers could cover and hide their illegal rum that was to be transported. He also told me that during the Depression, they ate clams for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and were damn glad of it. So I did a dive into some of the old market. Oh. So this was one of Wilton's clam hearts. Doing a dive into some of the publications. In 1930, the Hyannis Patriot had an article about the vanishing clam. And it says here, and of course the most important recommendation was systematic propagation and protection of the beds until a new supply is ready. That was back in 1930. Now this I found fascinating. I'm going to read this to you, as difficult as might be to see. Now all of this is vital interest to Cape Cod. And to think for a moment that clams now sold on the market as Cape Cod clams are really, quote, really bootleg clams from Nova Scotia and Maine is cause for a revolt. Some may argue that clams are clams, just as peaches are peaches, but Cape Cod clams are clams of quality and are so recognized in the market. Here they naturally thrive and are distinctive clams, little necks, soft-shelled, quahogs, or whatever variety is worth the name. That is to say, clams are different just as peaches are different, particularly canned peaches. Else, why would people feel that when they can get clams with the Cape Cod label, they are getting the real thing? They know the genuine Cape Cod clam is not of the rejuvenated variety, but a good, honest clam raised and nurtured under proper natural conditions. I thought that was funny. Here in 1957, shellfish warden Reno Lampe of West Barnstable said that the season for scallops, which opened on Tuesday, will be short and poor in Barnstable. And in the D-White Register in 1964, this was funny too, it was an opinion article. It says, New Englanders will eventually add tomatoes to clam chowder. Tomatoes will add zest to the other ingredients, which will consist largely of salt pork, potatoes, onions, and milk. The missing ingredient, clams, will be absent because of what we in this decade did to Massachusetts salt marshes. Okay, so here in 1915, the Yarmouth Register has an article referring to early aquaculture by the State Act for the County of Barnstable. So here is an act relative to the planting and cultivation of clams and quahogs in the County of Barnstable. And it refers to getting permission to grant a license for such term of years not excluding 15 for people to grow clams, or grow shellfish. So there's like 5 sections to that act. So here are a few slides, old slides, courtesy of Barnstable Village historian Jim Ellis and West Barnstable historian Nancy Shoemaker. And they were transferred to digital format by Nancy. I thank you so much. Here's a picture of John Mackey. There's a road in West Barnstable, John Mackey Road. So in the 1930s and the 1940s, John Mackey was seeding clams and had 50 to 60 men digging steamers and quahogs that were driven in his 2 Rio trucks to markets in Boston. Mind you then, they did not have neoprene, they did not have some of the conveniences we have. Here is Manny Souza, which I believe is was a shellfish warden. And here's a picture of commercial shellfish and commercial clamming. So a bunch of fellows shoulder to shoulder are with their clam forks and also babysitting. There's a pile of steamer clams in front of them in the marsh.
Hard work.
It is hard work. And you see they're fully clothed with long sleeves. I imagine they had green heads just like we have green heads.
What's that?
Here's a shell fisherman with a shovel. That's not a good idea. They break more than they keep. And here is a hunky shell fisherman dragging for quahogs. When I put the zoom on that, they sure were full of quahogs. And actually, courtesy of Jim Ellis, I have a scallop drag. It looks similar to that with weights that you can see near the piano. Here are the family, the Maraspins, clamming. The clam rake, 4 tines, and the steamer clams. And I don't have a date on that. Maybe I should get that if I can recover that. But it's possible that this was in the creek by Rendezvous Lane, because that was the main access to Barnstable Harbor before Barnstable Harbor was dredged out. Here's a quahog Quonset, the shellfish in the barrels. And here's the Cullity family harvesting quahogs in the basket and pails. Here's some working boats in Barnstable Harbor. This is with the cannery, the freezer, and the working boats. Another picture of Barnstable Harbor with the working boats. Here's Katuitt Oyster Company. Don't need a label for that. And here are oyster sheds in Katuitt. I'm not quite sure where in Katuitt that is, but at that time the working sheds and working boats were on the harbor, not big houses. So here on 6A, about across the street from where the Lamb and Lion Inn is, there was what used to be Nemec's TV.
Yeah.
And in that general area was Joe Nebb's shack. He had a sign, Barnstable clams, like that out there. Did anybody buy clams there?
Didn't get my television repaired.
Okay, here's my commercial. I would be grateful to copy and return old shellfishing photos or documents to archive for historical records. So if any of you with old families have those in your attics or closets, I'd be happy to scan them and get them into the public record here so we can remember some of these things. By the way, I should mention that many of these pictures of Barnstable Harbor shellfishermen were taken by, what's the name of Adams, Mike and Adams. What's Adams' last name? Robbie, who was that? Goulart? Adam Goulart. I was told by Jim Ellis that, because I was shocked that there are so many high quality pictures of people in the water way back then when photographic equipment was expensive. And he said that Adams Goulart was an amateur photographer and would take pictures and then develop them himself in his on his property.
High quality.
Yeah. So we're lucky to have these working people's pictures. Okay, so to modern times. In Barnstable, we basically have three categories of shellfishing. Recreational shellfishing, which is augmented with municipal shellfish propagation funds and labor. Commercial shellfishing, where there are wild harvesters, also taking advantage of the municipal propagation program. And commercial aquaculture, which is essentially farming of the sea, where they use grow-out techniques that maximize growth and minimize loss. Municipal and municipal propagation private aquaculture use similar techniques, but municipal propagation is dependent upon taxpayer support and the fees of shellfish license holders. Private aquaculture is privately financed and is for-profit, is licensed by the town, state, and federal agencies on non-productive ground, intertidal ground. It provides jobs, supports the local economies, and delivers environmental benefits. The growers assume the benefits and all the risks as private businesses. I got these statistics from the town of Barnstable that in 2018 there were over 2,700 licenses in Barnstable, and in 2019 there were over 2,800, so they increased by 74. The number of commercial licenses is steady at 47 because it's a closed fishery. They patrol over 2,000 acres of open shellfish areas. They planted 300 remote set shell bags and increased the amount of cultureless oyster seed, which it results in individual oysters to be harvested from over 300,000 to over 1 million. In quahogs, they grew over 3 million seed in 2018 and 1.5 million in 2019. They held 2 clamming classes for kids and 2 clamming classes for adults. And they were assisted with volunteers. And here's some interesting trends. In 1995, there were as many as 193 commercial licenses in Barnstable. Back then, I think they were not as fussy about checking for residency requirements, and rumor had it that 6 guys from Ipswich would come down and rent a room to dig the bounty of clams that were in Barnstable in 1995. It was pretty a robust set. Now there are 47 commercial licenses, and it's held steady by decision of the Shellfish Committee in the town, which is almost a quarter of the former commercial shellfishing pressure that was back in 1995. They realized it just wasn't sustainable. And there were as few as 1,754 recreational shellfish licenses in 1997. That was before the shellfish propagation program kicked in. So now there are over 2,800 licenses, which is an increase of 60% over the number of recreational licenses sold 23 years ago. So my point is, at one time the commercial shellfish voice was loud and the recreational voice was soft. And now it's pretty much flipped around. The recreational license holders have a greater voice in the shell fishery, and the commercial license holders not as much as they used to. And for your information, recreational licenses are $40 for a town of Barnstable resident. It is $30 for a senior citizen. Non-resident is $140, and seasonal is $70. Commercial shellfish license fees are $550. And for 65 and over, $350. The town maps this. These are all online. Either the town GIS department or the shellfish department. It shows you the areas that are closed, areas that are open, where areas are landing, where there is shellfish propagation areas. And here's a shellfish aquaculture zone in Barnstable Harbor. They're a little more spread around on the south side because they predated the time when the aquaculture zone was established. So oyster propagation for the town can look like this. These trays and racks are exposed at a very low tide. Most of the time they are underwater. Quahog propagation, the town buys seed that's tiny, as little as a sesame seed. Here it shows that there are 866 animals per, I think that's per milliliter. And they're grown until this size, which is about the size of a pea or a bean, and planted under nets. Recreational shellfishing is open to those with a shellfish license. It can be a resident or non-resident. And here's what the area off of Scudder Lane looks like on a popular low tide day. So it's a sign of spring when it's time to get your shellfish license. The new licenses are expected on March 1st each year. They're being sold now. So here's an interesting thing. Whereas we have a book of shellfish license regulations now, back in 1912 there were only 5 regulations. It says that you need to that you can get a permit, that no clams were to be taken on the south side of Barnstable Harbor. You couldn't take more than 4.5 bushels of clams, including shells. The license wasn't transferable, and it could become void if you were in violation. So it's worth a lot of money. The town of Barnstable recorded this by the natural resource officers, that about 510 bushels were harvested of quahogs, 96 bushels of soft-shell clams, 46 bushels of razor clams, very few bay scallops, and over 790 bushels of oysters. But these are actually recorded by the natural resource officers, where the actual harvest is greater. I'd like to give my applause for the Barnstable Association for Recreational Shellfishing. They promote and support Barnstable shell fisheries. They advocate for good water quality. They provide volunteers for the shellfish propagation projects and the Learn to Shellfish classes. They help defend the shellfish habitat areas, especially when private piers are proposed through historically productive shellfish areas. They feature the shell fisheries with the annual Blessing of the Rakes. And they celebrate our maritime connection with a float at the annual West Barnstable 4th of July parade.
And they sometimes win.
And they win, yes. And they raise funds for scholarships for
Very good.
young people. Thank you. So here is a little overview with some statistics from the Division of Marine Fisheries. In 2018, there's quite a lag time between when the data is collected and when they actually publish it. But in 2018, these are in pounds. The landings of oysters are 9 million pounds, quahogs 4 million pounds, razor clams 728,000 pounds, thank you, and softshell clams over 3 million. Now in 2016, Barnstable was the 4th top port for landing shellfish in our state. I think they've become number 3 now, but I wasn't able to confirm that before this talk. So here's a look at aquaculture. Aquaculture is from the Latin word water and cultivation, which is farming of the sea, similar to aquaculture. In Barnstable, we have 49 aquaculture licenses with 156 acres under cultivation. In the state, there's 391 aquaculture licenses with over 1,200 acres farmed. But it provides over 1,000 jobs. This is in the state. It says estimated a couple of years ago at over $23 million in shellfish aquaculture harvest, with a multiplier effect of the economic impact of $42 million. I'm sure it's more than that. Now this is very interesting. I did this talk in 2017 where there were 6 million individual oysters, pieces of oysters. I should say oyster cultivation is the most popular in our town and probably in the state. And they were valued at over $3 million. The quahogs fishery wasn't as robust, but 251,000 pieces valued at $61,000. So this was in 2017. I had the statistics fellow from the state make a new slide for me, just for this talk. Oysters are now being sold, this was, I think, as of 2019, over 10 million oysters sold out of Barnstable, valued at nearly $6 million. Quahogs, over almost 1 million pieces of that, valued at over 252,000. This has really been a growth industry in a fairly short amount of time. Back in 2017, I prepared this slide that said in 2012, now this is now back into pounds, not pieces. In 2012, 4 million pounds were harvested, and that in 2017, 8 million pounds, over 8 million pounds. So between 2012 and 2017, it doubled in 4 years, and it has accelerated since then. So the little oysters start out like this. They're all on this, individually pulled out on this little ruler. And in 3 weeks, they grow fast. And in 6 weeks, many of them look like that. There's a pencil for a scale. They're grown in various ways. This is, you want to hold them in vessels that they're not going to slip through. So they're periodically sized so that they can go into larger and larger meshed containers. There's my hand with the young oysters in an oyster bag. And these are hanging baskets that are held, strung out like on a clothesline. Here's the fellow we work for, Mark Begley, with a bunch of brand new oyster trays. They won't look like that at the end of the season. They look more like this at low tide, after they've been weathered and beaten up by storms and ice. Another view of different holding cages.
Trish, where is that exactly?
That is in Barnstable Harbor, in the aquaculture zone.
So off of.
So we go out of Scudder Lane, go around Huckins Neck, in around Phyllis Island to the aquaculture zone that's between Sandy Neck and Huckins Neck. And we have a treat. We get to see some wildlife, seals. Here's I think it's called a white something scoter. And most of the beneficial working tides are at the cusp of the day. We work with the moon pulls the water out, the moon tides, so many of the best working tides are going out at dark or coming in at dark, because just at daybreak the water is the lowest. And we work with our neighbors. Here is Paul Hamlin, thank you, Paul Hamlin. Paul Weinstein. These are all farmers that are alongside our farm. Rob Ashworth and his wife Nancy Ashworth. Scott Laurie and his wife Tina and their pet seagull Charlie. They feed him. Here's John Martin and his helper. Jared Hemela, Barnstable Seas Farms. He is father Les Hemela and his brother Aaron. And Bob Bryson. And this is what Mark's farm looks like later on in the season. We work all year. We've been slacking this winter. Sorting in the winter. In the cold and the wind. Overwintering. We take in the 1-year-old oyster seed and overwinter them in either a refrigerator setting or in a root cellar that's kept chilled. The adult oysters stay on the farm and sales continues through the winter. Now that we're done with winter, we'll go into water quality. So we couldn't sell any shellfish if our water quality wasn't up to public health standards, whether we're going for steamers, oysters, or cohogs. So the state has over 2,000 water testing stations, and these areas are broken into addresses. SC31 is part of Barnstable Harbor. This is CCB, Cape Cod Bay 31, Barnstable Harbor. SC, South Coastal 19, there are several areas. So you can find the status of every coastal embayment in the state and its status. And they are regularly tested with the State Division of Marine Fisheries partnering with the town's shellfish staff. Here's a picture of Devin Harrington. She is Barnstable Natural Resource Officer who's inspecting for compliance with public health regulations at the point of a shellfish sale, transfer. So here is Mark making the sale. The paperwork has to be signed, temperatures taken. All the shellfish that's transferred are tagged. So Devin is in charge of making sure there's compliance and will write you a ticket if it's not. So the oysters are good for you, shellfish are good for you. It's a healthy protein source, low in calories, high in omega-3 fatty acids, many minerals that are good for you. Shellfish are on the list of Weight Watchers power foods. They improve the immune system, boost brain power, eases symptoms of arthritis, aids in eyesight, promotes heart health, and lowers cholesterol. Here's another page taken from Organic Facts that talks about also similarly strengthening the immune system, protects against osteoporosis, healing wounds, promotes blood circulation, helps to prevent cardiovascular disease, and everybody's favorite, boosts sexual performance, particularly in men. And it's a premier food product. You can walk out with your shellfish license, come home with a limit of shellfish, and or go to a restaurant and pay $3 a piece, $3.50 a piece for them. I'm proud to say that Mark's oysters were featured in the 20 best oysters that were in Coastal Living a couple of years ago. Beach Point Oysters, here he is, owner-operator. My husband Lenny. And it's not always convenient to go out. So a couple of years when we had that cold spell, we had to drive and launch. The water was open, but the icebergs were around, and some of them were very big. That was a picture not far from Mark's Grant. So I call it iceberg bingo. What happens is when the tide comes up, the icebergs will float around, and the tide goes out, the wind shifts around, and it might land on your crop and crush it. Not only the product, but your gear. But you don't know where those are coming from and where they're going to go. But we're treated to lovely sunrises and sunsets. I'm feeling very lucky that we have a chance to capture that. Mark's driving the boat so I can take pictures. But it always isn't very pleasant. There's many times the camera doesn't come out. And here's a storm approaching, and this day was the day we brought the boat in just in time, because while we were on the farm, our phones went off with a tornado warning. And this storm came coming through, and you might be able to see over there in the background, the water started pelting just as we got out of the water. But we're lovely, it's lovely out there, and I feel lucky to work out there, and thanks for listening.